Um, Let me just say that it is very exciting for me, having read her work for so many years, to actually be up on stage with her, talking about things that both of us are so passionate about. So over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be getting into a whole bunch of issues related to heritage, how heritage is constructed, and how cities and monuments reveal histories to us. Um, One thing I find very interesting about your work, Ranaji, is that you constantly talk about these layers of history that every city contains, right? This is something that, of course, is very obvious to us in Jaipur. All of us can see remnants of history dating all the way back to the 14th, 15th century, even earlier if you go to the Albert Hall Museum, dating all the way up to the colonial period and, of course, to modern history. But your work has explored Delhi in such detail. And Delhi, perhaps more than any other city in India, is perfect for this kind of view because it has so many centuries of monuments that have been left by so many rulers and dynasties, and even beyond that, common people and the elites. So can you tell us a little bit about how your journey through these layers of history in Delhi really started?
Thank you so much, first of all, to JLF for inviting me and Anirudh for moderating, and congratulations on your fantastic book.
Thank you so much.
So my journey in Delhi actually started when I started exploring the monuments of Delhi and realizing that not much has been written about it. A lot was written, but that was pre-independence. So I felt that I wanted to look at it from my, a lens of a modern Indian, of how I would look at it. And from a historic, of course, coming from a background of history, so I wanted to give it not just, I wanted to give it a nice historical, research-based content about monuments. As far as layers is concerned, the first instance of a monument that we find is, of course, the Ashoka, minor Ashoka edict in Kailash, east of Kailash. But after that, you have documented built heritage right from the time of the Tomars, and of course, it's continuing till today. We have we can see the central vista, etc., being built. What fascinated me about Delhi was the way each ruler came and stamped his authority.
Right.
They built a new city, and as I start in my one of the books, Darya, Badal or Hakim. That is what is needed for a new city. So you need Darya, you need water, you need Badal, that is a favorable climate, and you need a Hakim, a ruler who's willing and able to invest and to his grand vision. So that, culminated in Shah Jahanabad, where all these three things you see together, and you see the vision of Shah Jahan taking shape in the form of a city which is so composite. It's built on the thing of Vastu Shastra. It's like a bow, and which is supposed to be very auspicious in Vastu Shastra. Yet it is built on the principles of Hasht Bahesht. So, these things fascinate me, the layers that are underneath each building. A building is not just bricks and stones. It's, so much of the coming together of various cultures.
That's a really interesting point. I think that when you think about architecture today, very often we don't realize how much architecture reveals about the society that makes it.
Yes.
Architecture is really a condensed social fact in a sense. And Mughal architecture, I'm sure, really reveals so much about this fascinating globalized world that they were a part of, as well as the many legacies they're inheriting, both as Muslim kings and also as profoundly Indian kings. So this Vastu Shastra example is very interesting. I think there's also a lot of Jain temples that the Mughals, or Jain buildings that the Mughals actually patronized in Delhi itself, right? One thing I'm also curious about, Ranji, is that you mentioned about how, Shah Jahanabad showed you this layer of history. But I'm more curious also about individual stories that you may have come across as you're exploring these monuments, right? Did you ever have a moment where you were in a building or perhaps looking at something and you just felt connected to a person living many, many centuries away from you?
The person I feel most connected to in Delhi, and she's the only character that appears in this new book of mine, A Saint, Folk Tale, and other stories, lesser known monuments, is Sultan Razia. Women's Day has just passed, and I think she is one woman that we don't celebrate enough.
Yeah.
We don't celebrate her father enough also for having chosen the daughter as his successor instead of the son, saying that my daughter is, worthy of 20 sons. And her tomb in Delhi lies in the bylanes of a place called Bulbuli Khana in old Delhi. It's quite difficult to reach it unless you know that area. Uh, and on Wikipedia, because you have two other places, so people will say, one so-called tomb of Razia. They'll give her the name of Razia Sultan instead of Sultan Razia. She was a monarch in her own right, so she deserves to be called Sultan Razia. We'll never say Tutmush Sultan, we'll say Sultan in Tutmush. So why do we say Razia Sultan? Because for a woman's name, if you add Sultan, Sultana, Begum, whatever, it's a consort. It's either a consort or a daughter, but she was a monarch. So these are things which I've talked about in this book of mine, the new book, as well as I've talked about it in the book on Shah Jahanabad. That Sultan Razia is somebody who had a personality of her own. She ruled, and the only thing that the contemporary historians say that she was just born of the wrong sex. Otherwise, she was a very fantastic and able administrator. So even then, and what do we remember her as? If people here are old enough to have seen, those who are old enough to have seen Kamal Amrohi's picture, will always think of Razia as Hema Malini, and they'll think of her in context with Yaqut as Dharminder as Yaqut, which is such an injustice, because nobody, we think of her in terms of a pining monarch, pining for a slave. There's no such reference to any romance in contemporary history. So why do we add her name as, think of her as in terms of a romantic image? Again, these are things which I want to, I'm passionate about, that, to give her due. First of all, Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi, which is written just within 100 years of her death, talks about the fact that Sultan Razia's tomb in Bulbuli Khana is one of the villages that we have bought for building a new city in Firozabad is Bulbuli Khana, where Sultan Razia's tomb is situated. Now, this is written in 1356. She died in 1240. So where is the confusion that you come up with, that there's a grave of hers in Tonk or in Kethel? These Wikipedia entries are what irritate me, because then people say so-called, and I always keep saying, why so-called? When Tariq-e-Firoz Shah is saying that she's buried there, it's just 100 years later. They would obviously know when they're buying a land that this is where she's buried. So why the confusion? And the second thing, the confusion about her name. So this is one character I'm very connected to. I've written a lot about her, and the fact that she trusted Yaqut as a officer. He was a trusted, officer of her father, and a kind of a mentor to her, a father figure, not the passionate lover that you see in movies. So we should see history from the lens of history, not from movies and serials and WhatsApp or Wikipedia.
That actually brings up a lot of very, very interesting points. One thing I found very striking was when you're talking about Yaqut is that we seem incapable of understanding powerful women in history without being linked to a man. There must be a regent, or they must have stolen power from the rightful son or something or the other. And there seems to be almost this reluctance to actually give them their due as people who are ambitious and who are capable of actually retaining and ruling successfully. And that also, I think, connects to a few other questions I had about how heritage is constructed. You talked about how Wikipedia claims that this is the so-called tomb of Razia Sultana, Sultan Razia. And now that's something that everybody believes. And even though it's a monument that's very profoundly tied to the history of Delhi, it's something that very few people actually even know how to visit. Are there other lesser known monuments like this that tell us more about a city than we might otherwise think?
In Delhi itself, there are over 1,300 monuments, out of which only I think 350 odd are under ASI. So I have seen people, living inside monuments, living inside gateways, living inside dargahs. I've seen, dargahs surrounded or gateways surrounded and, encroached upon. Even the Red Fort, for example. Red Fort is a symbol of Indian power today. The flag on 15th August, the flag is hoisted from the Red Fort. But if you see the Red Fort, it's only about 20-30% of what the Shah Jahan built. So when the first time I went to Red Fort, I had visited Agra Fort earlier. So when I went to Red Fort and I saw and I said, what's the fuss about? There's nothing here. And then when I started reading, then I realized that it had all been demolished. 80% of it was demolished. So what we see now is just a shell of its former self. So like we keep reading about the Peacock Throne. Now there are various things. Again, if you search online, you will find various references to the Peacock Throne being here, being in Iran. But those were all replicas. The actual Peacock Throne has been destroyed. It was destroyed in the raid in which Nadir Shah died. He had taken it from here. So we only have one representative photo of the actual Peacock Throne, that is Takhte Murassa or Takhte Taus, which was painted for Basha Nama. Another thing, you'll often hear the words, the verses, Agar Firdaus Barruwe Zamiyast, Hamiyasto, Hamiyasto, Hamiyast, that if there is a paradise on earth, it is here, it is here, it is here. Everybody will tell you it's written for Kashmir, and then they'll tell you it's written by Amir Khusro. Now, Amir Khusro never visited Kashmir, but he is the first poet or the first writer to actually praise India in his book Noor Satar. And though there is a contestation that he wrote these lines, in the book on Shah Jahanabad, I have explored and I've come to the conclusion. Of course, that it's an open class. This is my opinion. Everybody else is welcome to have theirs. I've left it open in the book also, that these lines were written specifically for the Red Fort. Because Red Fort was built on the thing of a paradise. The concept of Red Fort was Hasht Bahesh, paradise, Firdaus, with the concept of Jannat in Islam is with the flowing water, trees, fruit trees, etc. And that's exactly the way the Red Fort was built, with the Nehre Bahisht, the stream of paradise. So the Nehre Bahisht flows throughout the Red Fort, public and private buildings. And you had flowering gardens, you had fruit trees. You didn't have the lawns that are now today, because these manicured lawns and the parterres, that is the kyaris and all that, these were built post 1857 by the British, because that's the concept that they had in their country homes and their forts. But India didn't have that concept. India had the concept of very, gardens which had trees, whether flowering, fruit, bushes, something which gave back, like it either was a fragrance or, like all these things. There's such themed gardens there. They had one garden called Mehtab Bagh, which Mehtab means moon. So this was for use in the evening, and all the trees there had white flowers. So the white flowers, whatever was used there was white. So I have seen in the Mumtaz Mahal Museum that there was a white hookah, that when the emperor would go there, he would smoke from a white hookah. The pandan and the all the things that were used there for condiments, whatever, everything there was white. And I'm sure they would be also wearing white. So, these kind of themes, settings, which were very, very popular with the Mughals and even other emperors and kings, all that has now somehow been lost, because what we see is what we are shown from a very colonial lens. Even the Taj Mahal, for that example matter, what we see today, Taj Mahal, is what we are shown. We don't see the real Taj Mahal.
Okay, I have so many follow-up questions. What I find so interesting is to actually kind of imagine this court culture of the Mughals, right? I mean, sure, the Mughals themselves are very glamorous in terms of how they're approaching this, but like, I very often wonder, like, what would the life of somebody has to actually arrange the white clothes for the emperor, make sure the white hookah is cleaned and ready for smoking that evening. It must have been like a real kind of logistical operation to keep the Mughal court like running day after day. And it's just one part of like a much broader kind of culture of these elites who are building monuments in Shah Jahanabad at the time, because you also have like various generals and Jagirdars who are also coming to Shah Jahanabad, buying up land, building havelis, building gardens. Are there any interesting stories that you came across from?
So there was the Tosha Khana. They were very well organized. They had departments for everything, including a Tosha Khana, which was the wardrobe department. Then they had a department for the jewelry. So every day it would come, and the Basha would never repeat the the clothes. The clothes would be then given away. So of course jewelry was not. But so in the morning when the Basha woke up, this is something that I've translated in that book called The City of My Heart, where you have that he gets up, Hakim will come, test nerves pakadenge, check the pulse, then of course then the Qazi will, the Imam Shah will come, the namaz, etc. Then the they'll be given medicinal syrups and the clothes. All that is very well detailed, very well done. So I find these very fascinating. Not just the Mughals. Even if you go into the other stories that I have written about, places like Udaygiri and Barabar caves and all.
Yeah.
It's there's so much to learn from architecture because they connect us to our past.
Yeah. There's this point you made earlier about how the British and this colonial lens that we have in looking at these buildings, right? I feel like there's a tendency for all of us, especially younger Indians, when we go to a monument, it's just these silent stones. It's just, maybe it's a nice photograph if the sunlight is about right and you can Instagram it properly, but there's very little sense of like how these things actually looked and felt when they were alive and occupied. One great example that I personally keep coming back to is the Gol Gumbaz in Bijapur, which up till I think the 1920s was the largest dome in the world. So for nearly 400 years, just imagine the kind of engineering that would have gone into it for it to be so large, right? Today, there's all these myths that are told about it. One is that, the reason why you can hear all these sounds in the dome is because the Sultan wanted to hear his courtesans' whispers late at night when they were meet in this dome. It's a mausoleum. I don't think anybody is crazy enough to want to meet their lover in a mausoleum and then hear their whispers there, right? Of course, in its own time, it would have had all these cloth hangings and so on. Echoes and reverberations won't have been as much of a thing. But now, because none of those things are still there, we tend to project all these legends and spicy stories into it. I'm just wondering, Ranji, I mean, feel free to ignore this, but can you tell us any spicy stories about Delhi's monuments?
Let me think of a nice spicy monument. I can recommend spicy book that's called Murakka Delhi, where you have a lot of gossip about Delhi and about the dancing girls and the courtesans. But yes, one story is Jahandar Shah's reign, where he actually fell in love and married this Lal Kamar. And there are a lot of stories about her, how he employed her friends and relatives. Koi sitar baja raha hai, koi gana gaane wala hai. And like the courtier saying that these are skills which we should also pick up now because more emphasis is being paid on that. But behind all this, there is also a lot of sordidness because there was the continuous wars of succession going on after Aurangzeb. You had kingmakers. So there's part of Red Fort, which is now a part of Red Fort. It was a separate fort called Salimgarh, which served as a kind of a prison. It is there all later on that Aurangzeb's daughter Zebun-Nisa was also imprisoned. The INA of officers, of course, were imprisoned in the Bauli, but there were INA soldiers imprisoned in Salimgarh. And Salimgarh served for the longest time as a kind of place where the Salatin, that is the offspring of various emperors who could be a threat to the reigning emperor, they were kept locked up. So it's not all glamour. There is a lot of tragedy also behind it. Like I've explored in this book, A Saint of Folktale, I've explored, Burhanpur, where Mumtaz Mahal died, and which is now in shambles. Nobody knows that, Burhanpur has a sense of history. They feel that they lost out on the Taj Mahal. That had the logistic problem not been there, she would have been buried there. The Taj Mahal would have been there. But so these are stories which I find of human interest. Or say the story about the Barabar caves in Bihar. Very few people know that that is India's first built heritage, the gateway of that cave called Lomas Rishi, and it's been copied, I think, in Delhi in the Vigyan Bhavan, if I'm not wrong. One of the buildings in Delhi has that gate. So, and you realize that uh, Ashoka is not building it for the Buddhists. This is pre that. He's building it for a sect called the Ajivikas.
Yes, yes.
So, these stories you get to know, and when you read the inscriptions and you realize, okay, there was a sect called the Ajivikas also living, and Ashoka is building for them. And when I went inside it, the surface is so shiny that my kitchen granite built just a year ago isn't as shining. I could see my face, I could see my reflection in the walls of the caves. They're all granite caves. And just think of it, people sitting there and polishing the kind of fervor. I went into one of the rooms which was used for meditation, and there my guide started, he said, you close your eyes. I closed my eyes. It was dark anyway, but I closed my eyes and he started chanting Buddham, Sharanam, Gachami. And I could feel goosebumps, because I could imagine that somebody sitting here carving and with this kind of chanting going on from somewhere else, that kind of energy it would have given him to just sit and polish. Can you just imagine, without any, they had no tools, nothing. I don't know what they were using, very primitive tools in the second BC. And yet they come up with something which even today people are trying to figure out. And it takes us 1 second to write Pinky loves Papu and spoil the wall. That is another reason why so many of us, we keep trying to raise this awareness that this is our heritage. We have to preserve it. It's not only just built heritage, every heritage, whether it's food, whether it's clothes, whether it's history, whether it's historical figures, every kind of heritage, it's up to us to preserve. Otherwise, what has come down through the years will be lost very soon.
There's a few interesting stories that I actually want to add on to this, Ranaji. So the first is there's a site called Shigriya in Sri Lanka. I'm not sure how many of you have been. So it's a 12th century palace that was built and it has these beautiful murals of apsaras on one of its top floors. Now we have inscriptions, they're like graffiti basically, made by men for many centuries after, writing stuff like, "Oh, Apsara, you have stolen my heart," and all these things. So the whole, Raju loves Pinky thing is not exactly new to the subcontinent. But to me, at least, I feel like maybe 1,000 years from now, some archaeologist is going to be able to say some very interesting things about Indian society in the 21st century by the graffiti that we're leaving, which I find very fascinating. Also, in terms of the Barabar caves, right? I happened to read a little bit of research about the Ajivikas who lived there. And there's such a profoundly interesting sect. There are people who believe that you have to go through 6 billion rebirths or something, and once you reach your last rebirth, there's no point doing anything anymore. So you might as well just give up on life, hang around naked, and eventually, when the time comes, dehydrate yourself to death, which can't have been a nice way to go. But yeah, to just imagine actually being in those caves, hearing those chants that it may have heard for so many centuries. And I was thinking also that kind of mirrored surface of the rocks there. How many faces would they have seen? Across how many centuries, people of how many different ethnicities and religions, and to think of yourself as just one in that endless river of generations, and that you'll see many more faces after you. That's what I really love about actually seeing these monuments and realizing what a long life they have that will continue for many, many centuries after we are long gone. So coming back, of course, to our conversation after that bit of a tangent there. I'm curious, Ranaji. So you've talked so much about Delhi itself and all these stories that you have discovered from looking at its monuments. What is it like for you to kind of expand your scope and go beyond into Burhanpur, into all these other sites? How did it impact your understanding of India's history and your own place within that?
As you just mentioned, I started writing about Delhi. Then when I had lived abroad for a long time. We used to live in the Middle East for about 15 years, and I came back to Delhi in 2013 when I started writing about Delhi. So I decided if I'm going to write about Delhi, I have to live in Delhi. So I came to live in Delhi, and it took me, I still haven't discovered everything or researched everything in Delhi. There's still a lot more to be done in Delhi, but my books, all the 3 books are done. So I said, okay, let me start thinking of now going beyond Delhi and going beyond even monuments. So this book by Rupa was commissioned by them on the basis of a column I used to write for the Hindu. I used to write a column for the Hindu called Where Stones Speak. And when I started writing, of course, first of all, I just wrote about the places I'd been to. And then I love traveling. So I started then traveling to places. And I also did a project for ASI, had outsourced these projects called Monument Mitra. So there is this app called Audigos, Audio Audigos, which is a guide to 12 monuments in UNESCO, some of them are UNESCO heritage monuments, and I traveled for those. And when I traveled for those, then I tried to make the logistics such, like, for example, when I went to say Bodh Gaya. Bodh Gaya is part of the temple, the Bodh Gaya temple, Mahabodhi temple, sorry. The Mahabodhi temple is part of the Monument Mitra that I have written, curated. So then I decided, let me travel, and that's when I went to Barabar caves also. So I've traveled all over Bihar in those days. I went all the way to Rohtas Fort, which again is in the book, then to Sher Shah Suri's in Sahasram. Then I went to Rajgir, I went to Bihar Sharif. So I travel and see as much as possible. Now, just see the, the time period. Barabar caves, then I go to Rohtas, which fort, which is started by Sher Shah, but built basically by Man Singh, then Sher Shah's own tomb, then all these places in Nalanda, Rajgir, I visited all of them. And of course, you have the Mahabodhi temple. When you talked of layers, Mahabodhi temple has so many layers, and it tells you also, these monuments also tell you the history of the period. How over the years they have seen different come out in different avatars, and what we see today, the Mahabodhi temple was basically rebuilt by Cunningham, and so it's very different from the what we have seen earlier. So these things, that when I travel, I try to make my program in such a way that I can see everything in that area. I'm very greedy that way.
This one, I find temples especially very interesting from this layers of history perspective, because they continue to be sacred sites across so many centuries, and the dynasties and the new patrons who come in across generations never renovate and get rid of what was already there. They usually just add to it, and you can really see, like, it's almost like, how do I put this? It's like when you cut into a rock formation, for example, right, and you can see all the layers of sediment that are building up over many centuries, and you can actually see millions of years of history just condensed there. The same thing happens also with Indian monuments and temples, right, where you can see all these layers and layers of people that they're leaving behind across so many centuries.
And the additions that they make, also shows their own place in history.
Yes.
Like how has that person, that dynasty progressed, because the initial part of that monument or the temple may have been small, and then suddenly it becomes enlarged because the descendants are now doing much better.
Yeah.
So I found that, and when I went to the south and we went to Hampi, Badami, I was very fascinated by especially Badami. Yes. And Aihole.
There's especially if you know how to read the architecture, and there's something that I think a lot of us don't necessarily know from the get-go, is that once you're able to recognize how architecture changes over centuries, you're able to say, oh wow, this is something that comes from the 1st century, something that comes from the 15th century. And also the ambitions of the people building these things change, right? When you start off with a temple, it might very well be the king wants it to be his personal chapel. But then 500 years from now, you want to expand it into a major pilgrimage site. So you add these expansive courtyards and all these halls for people to eat in and all that. And like I said in the beginning of this talk, right, architecture is really a social fact. It's a condensed social fact. You can tell so much from all these layers that accrete over the centuries. So I'm almost out of questions. So I'd encourage you all to start thinking about what you'd like to ask Ranaji. But before we actually get to that, I want to ask you, Ranaji, in terms of as you were exploring Northern India, especially, right? So it's the size, I think, of India in general is very often not fully understood. It's the size of Western Europe easily. How have the monuments that you've seen, the kind of variations in architectural styles, the suggestions and the hints of lives that you've seen, have they impacted the way you see yourself in any way?
I think so. You feel so inconsequential inconsequential when you stand in front of a grand monument and you feel such a tiny person and you wonder, okay, why are we giving ourselves so much importance? We are nothing. We're just like ants over here. And another thing, when you were saying something which I get very upset about, like, is every time you go to a monument, even if it's built by a woman, the story will be like, say, for I've discussed Shah Kund Mosque in the book. You go there, even the boards, everything says that this mosque was built by Dara Shikoh. Actually, it's built by Jahanara. And when you tell them that it was built by Jahanara, they think that we probably don't know anything about it. And whatever is, the local law is, because a woman is not supposed to have, I think, that much agency that she can build something so grand, especially in Kashmir. Of course, people from Delhi know all about Jahanara and all about her Chandni Chowk and how she was a very prolific builder. But in it is even the first time I wrote about Shah Kund Mosque, I wrote it as built by Dara Shikoh. It's only after reading Supriya Gandhi's book that I realized, and then when I talked to her, that I realized it is built by Jahanara for her spiritual preceptor. So one thing that I've realized during my travels is that women were great builders, but they have not got their due. Something in Delhi, there's a mosque called Sarhindi Mosque, built by Shah Jahan's wife, Sarhindi Begum. When I went there, there's now a madrasa running there, and I talked to the people. They said, "No, you must be wrong. He named it after his wife. So he is so grand and great and generous that he's naming it after his wife. The fact that the wife built it has, now been forgotten. So these again are things which I want to write about and want to bring into consciousness that, women were builders, women had a lot of money, women had agency, especially the not just the Mughal women, even the women from other states and from other kingdoms. They were such great builders like Ahilya Bai and Rani Bhavani. I went to Murshidabad and I went to Calcutta, and I saw much built by Rani Bhavani. So people, always think of architecture as something here really huge and big. So it cannot be built by a woman. It, must be a man's contribution. And women, of course, were probably sitting at home and cooking and doing embroidery, which is very far from the truth. And for me, when I travel, people, often talk to me and ask me, okay, does my age, does my, gender hamper me when I'm when I'm traveling like this? And that is again something I've addressed in this new book, that it's specially written for women travelers, that when you go there, what are the things you should be careful about and what are the things that you should make sure that you take with you. Like going to, say, Daulatabad, it's a huge fort. And though there are people, but I make sure if I go to some place where there will be lonely places, I hire a guide. And guides will tell you the weirdest stories. So I tell them, please don't tell me the stories. You can take my photographs. But I have engaged them as a kind of security, because this is something that however independent I may be, or even my age, you still have to be careful. So these are things in this new book of mine. I've written tips for women travelers, that when you are traveling, these are the things in general for all travelers also, like this is the time, this is what you should be wearing. If you are going to a mosque, men should make sure that their shorts, if they're wearing shorts, should be below the knees. The ladies should carry, if you're going to a dargah, you should carry a scarf with you, because otherwise they will not allow you in. If you're going to a temple, what are your, the etiquette, the way you behave, all that is also important. I remember, once seeing children jumping over, the Humayun's tomb had a whole lot of graves on the platform, and there were these school children who were jumping on and off the graves. I kept telling them, I said, this is a grave. They wouldn't listen to me. Finally, I said, Bhoot nikal aayega, and they all ran away. So you have to have you have to sensitize children and everybody around us to what a monument actually is. As you said, it's a mausoleum, it's a temple, it's it may be a public like Abana, Neri, Bauli. It is a public monument. Whatever it is, people should know that, this is what it actually is, and this is how we should behave. It's not there, just gone there, done there, been there, taken a selfie or scratched your name over there and come away. go and engage with the monument the way it is. If it is a temple, go there with that kind of shraddha. You're entering a temple. Like when I went to this temple in Kanpur, which I described, the earliest, oldest surviving brick temple in Kanpur. People near Kanpur, and Ishan is sitting here. I don't know whether you visited it now or not. So, that a temple is something that it's very important as far as the history of architecture goes, because you can see the rudimentary arch. It's not an arcuate arch, but they are trying to make an arch there, and you see such glorious terracotta imagery there. A lot of it has been taken away. The panels have been taken away and graced various museums all over the world. But whatever is left there, and you see the skill of somebody working in the 5th and 6th century. So, these things, when you go there, go to whichever place you go with the kind of shraddha and the kind of respect that that place deserves.
One thing I really enjoy about your work is that it actually makes it possible through providing this kind of information for people to understand how to engage with heritage, right? Because it's not something that we very consciously kind of think about. Very often when we go to a historical site, there's this clear sense that, okay, this is different from a park. We must do different things here than a park, and we must appreciate it in different ways. The fact that you talk about this kind of thing is so much easier. I think that the accessibility of information, right? The fact that you know the stories and therefore now your approach to it is going to be different is one thing that your work does absolutely fantastically. Ranji, so one final question for me is in terms of how do you actually go about writing and researching these things? How do you collect these stories and how do you kind of weave them together in a way that brings the monuments to life for people?
So for me, my love story with monument began when I was, I think, 13 or 14 years old, and I visited Fatehpur Sikri. And I could just see everything happening. And then I was wishing that, I wish I would live in those days. So I wanted to, since then I wanted to write. Now, as far as research is concerned, whenever I visit a monument, I do read up a little about it before I go there. And then I take extensive photographs and videos, because I may not be able to visit a second time when I'm writing about it. So then I consult those, and I record. I make a lot of videos. As I said, I record my first impression. So that freshness comes when I'm writing. I also write on Instagram, etc. So I go back to refer to that. And apart from the primary, secondary sources, I rely a lot on the British gazetteers. Because the gazetteers and the reports, ASI reports, give you a lot of information of the changes that came. Especially a temple like Mahabodhi, even the Barabar caves and this Bhitargaon temple, Red Fort, you can see the changes from the gazetteers and from the ASI reports, that this is how the monument has changed over the years. I just recently, Delhi Archives posted on Twitter a map of the Red Fort giving names. Now the Red Fort there is called, I think, European Barrack Hospital. So say it may be 1860, 1850, I don't know, I've forgotten the date, but it's post 1857. It's no longer Qila'e-Mohalla, it's no longer Qila'e Mubarak, or even the Lal Haveli, which it got named in the twilight years of the Mughal. It's now European Barrack Hospital. So, gives you such a sense of the changing times. So that's why I like going through all the sources, and then of course my own. And I also do talk to all the locals. I talk to all the people around me to see what is their investment in that, because they are the stakeholders of that monument. Like just a few days ago, I was in Lucknow and I went to visit this monument called Malka-e-Aliya Ka Maqbara, a very grand name. It's encroached from all sides. It's a huge tomb. It's the mother of Sadat Ali Khan, built by Sadat Ali Khan. And she was the only Hindu wife of Nawab Shujauddaulah. She's the one who built the Bada Mangal Mandir in Hanuman Ji ka bahut bada mandir hai in Lucknow called Bada Mangal. She built that after her son was born, in a way of thanksgiving. That maqbara is, totally encroached. Now there is a person living there who comes from a Nawabi family, and he is now the ASI caretaker, and he was so proudly showing me. He said, देखिए ये मैंने साफ किया, मैंने सीढ़ियां अच्छी कर दी, पहले आप सीढ़ियों पे चढ़ नहीं सकती थी. So it's only when the stakeholders take interest, and you involve the stakeholders into a monument, that the monument will be looked after. And इनका नाम था तबस्सुम नासिर, and I said, नाम आपका बहुत प्यारा है, आप शायर हैं क्या? तो he said, नहीं शायर तो नहीं हूँ, लेकिन then he gave me, he said, मैं फला फला नवाब का नवासा हूँ. And he lives in one of the rooms beneath the tomb. So, and he's there all the time. So, I really love the way he has looked after it. The tomb is encroached from every side, but whatever is left, he rattled off all the names of all the ASI officers, and unse mil lijiyega, unse kahiyega thoda sa aur iske liye kare. But I could see that because of his involvement, now the tomb is, at least it's not going to fall down. So, these are also worries, that tombs which are neglected, or even temples or mosques, or anything which is neglected. There's a mosque in Mubarakpur, Kotla, which is abandoned, and it's used as a dumping ground.
As a dumping ground?
A dumping ground, because the people around are now all mostly people who've come from outside villages in 1924, and then after in 1947 from Pakistan after partition. For them, that mosque has no importance. So it's when you sensitize people to what is a mosque, what is a temple, why should you be respectful to the places of worship. They can be anybody's places of worship, but it is a place of worship. It's a place where you think of God, and so it is something you should respect and look after. So these are, and I see a lot of Instagrammers here. Their work is also very instrumental now, because they are trying to sensitize people to our heritage.
So I do have a few follow-up questions about stakeholders and who should be involved in kind of preserving these monuments, but we have 5 minutes left. So I'm just going to quickly pause here and open up to audience questions. If you have questions, please raise your hands. Okay, exciting. All right, quite a few. Let's begin with this gentleman there.
Okay, ma'am. So you said you love traveling and you have been to so many places. So my question is, before we go to any place and we start exploring, we have a kind of prediction for that place. So has it ever happened? ऐसा कभी हुआ है कि किसी place के बारे में आपने पहले से कुछ predict किया हो? You have predicted something, and when you went to that place, you got totally surprised. Your prediction got totally wrong. अगर ऐसा हुआ है तो कौन सा वो place है और क्या प्रेडिक्शन थी आपकी और क्या गलत हुआ?
जो ये किताब है नई वाली, उसकी जो टाइटल है, इट इज अ सेंट एंड अ फोक टेल, तो वो ही एक जगह थी. सो सब लोग आपको बताएंगे कि ये शेख चिल्ली का मकबरा है. Now, Sheikh Chilli is those from UP and Northern India would have read about the simpleton, जिसकी कहानियां हम बचपन में बहुत सुनते थे. Sheikh Chilli is supposed to be a simpleton. So I was wondering, and I read that Dara Shikoh has built it. So when I went, then I was wondering why Dara Shikoh building or his spiritual preceptor, उनके जो पीर मुर्शिद हैं, वो एक Sheikh Chilli क्यों है? And then when I went there, I realized the spelling. It's written there very clearly by the Haryana government is Sheikh Chehli. Chehel in Farsi is 40. So Sheikh Chehli was somebody who had done a 40-day penance. So I went there thinking I'm going to find a Sheikh Chilli, and I became the Sheikh Chilli because I want Sheikh Chehli. I found Sheikh Chehli. So जो आपने कहा ना, so I have recounted that childhood story in the book. Okay, this is the story that I had heard.
That's a lovely question. Thank you. That's Dr. Weeks, please. Yeah. Oh, here.
Thank you so much for this amazing session. And I was really interested in how you were speaking about Instagram and the role of that. What is your perception of how that has increased the kind of how stones speak? And also a very specific question, do you think Instagram is now reducing the number of times people actually graffiti on a monument because they actually just want to take a picture of themselves and the graffiti is, as it were, on Instagram?
So the Instagram has made a lot of easy to understand history, accessible for everybody. Of course, there is a darker side to it, that you have the misinformation also going on Instagram. But I always keep recommending that these are the handles, like Dr. Weeks herself. Her Instagram page is so wonderful if you follow it. All of them, Sam is sitting here, Ishan, all of us, the Instagram pages are so wonderful. If you read them, you can actually learn a lot about history in a very easy to understand way. And graffiti, of course, since we've started taking selfies, at least we stopped saying, Seema loves Sohan. And, in one monument, I even saw Papa aaj mummy se lade the.
Oh.
So, like, I hate Papa and mummy se lade the. And this is in the Begumpur Mosque, which was built in 1300 something. And I was wondering, inko aur koi jagah nahi mili thi except a 14th century mosque to record ki Papa and mummy se lade the. So at least on Instagram, you can go and say, haan, Papa mummy se lade the. And that's the end of it. It's not going to spoil. So yes, that's a very important aspect of it. And Instagrammers, I think, are doing a great job. We just have to make sure that we follow the right ones.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I wish we had more time, but we have like 30 seconds left. And before I get kicked out of stage, can we ask one more question? One more question? Okay. Yes, you there, ma'am.
Thanks for facilitating a wonderful session. Thank you. And lovely, your personality, your smile, all of that is such a pleasure to watch. I was very intrigued when you said that we are seeing Taj from the colonial lens. So if you can just give us a few nuggets, because that's what we end up propagating to anybody who visits. So I want to get rid of that misinformation at least.
See, when you go to the Taj Mahal, you stand at the doorway and you see the Taj at the back. The original Taj had a lot of trees. Now those trees were there because that was the concept of gardens. As I said, Taj is built on a paradisical theme. It's supposed to be a piece of paradise, and this is for the maghfarat of the queen, for her afterlife, to give her benefits. So you would have seen trees there, and the first glance of the Taj would not have been from there. And also those trees prevented sand, fine grains of sand, from going and eroding the marble. The other part is that the Taj was built in two parts. One is the secular part, one is the religious part. We see it as a monument of love because we are told it's a monument of love. The original name was Roza-e Munawwara or Roza-e Mutahhara, which means the illumined tomb or the pure tomb, because it was built as a means of deliverance of the queen to in her afterlife. It was not built for us to sit on that bench and take selfies. That bench was built by Lord Curzon. It was not part of Shah Jahan's dream. Shah Jahan's dream was to have, and as soon as you enter the gate, the whole theme of Taj Mahal is life and death and resurrection. That can be seen from the very carefully chosen calligraphic panels from the Quran. So we don't see it as, something as a warning for afterlife, that, take care, everybody has to die. That's part of it. So when you enter, you have the first calligraphic panel on the Roza-e Munawwara's gate, which is called Darwaza-e Roza, is from Surah Fajr, which talks about paradise. So the theme is paradise, the aim is resurrection and maghfirat and deliverance, but we see it as a monument of love and, something very romantic, whereas it was supposed to be remind you of life and afterlife and death.
How fascinating.